Hello, my bone building friends. Recently, I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Keith McCormick on Facebook Live. He's a chiropractic doctor who dedicates his career to helping people with osteoporosis. Dr. McCormick participated in the 1976 Summer Olympic Games as a pentathlete. As a professional athlete who also ate a healthy diet, he thought that he was doing everything right to be healthy and strong. Then when he was 45 years old, he was diagnosed with having severe osteoporosis. Over the next 5 years, he experienced 12 osteoporotic fractures. Dr. McCormick knows firsthand the pain, frustration, and challenges that come with living with osteoporosis. After his devastating personal experience with osteoporotic fractures, he chose to devote his life to understanding and helping to prevent others from going through what he did. He earned a biology degree from Stanford University and a doctorate from the National College of Chiropractic. He's an expert on all things related to the spine, and he has been practicing chiropractic medicine since 1982. He's also the author of 2 books, The Whole Body Approach to Osteoporosis and Great Bones, Taking Control of Your Osteoporosis. It's my great privilege to share this interview with you. The recording picks up right after I introduce him on Facebook. Please let me know if you would like to see more content like this. So you are all in really good hands tonight, and I am really excited to have him here and to be presenting this.
Thank you for inviting me, Sarah.
This is such a privilege to get to have you. We've been visiting, and now I have this moment of introducing, and I suddenly feel nervous. But I'm really pleased to have you. Is there anything that you would like to share? I feel like I could just brag about you for days, and share the beautiful things that you've written and shared and taught so many people about osteoporosis.
No, I'm just happy to be here. And I just, as you said, I just wrote another book called Great Bones. And, I wrote that, I started 2.5 years ago. It took me 2.5 years to write. There's 1,200 references. I really wanted to write something that explained really how extensive, how complex osteoporosis is, and how your skeletal health, your skeleton is involved with every other organ of your body. And I think people don't understand that. People think that, osteoporosis, I'm going to take vitamin D, take calcium, vitamin K, and that's about it, But so the book's 700 plus pages, and the reason why, and it used to be, when I first wrote it, it was 950, so I cut a lot out of it. And but I give service to how complex it is. So it is a little bit of a difficult book to read, but I didn't want to gloss over it like some of the other books out there. And I wanted people to come away with a real understanding of the disorder so they can help themselves, help others. So that's why I did it. So
it's a beautiful book. The description, I can't help myself. I'm looking for it. There's this section. It's the description when you describe osteoblasts and osteoclasts. I love this description. A bit like traveling amoebas, osteoclasts devour sections of bone that have become weakened by microfractures. In addition to resorbing bone, osteoclasts release. So where was it? I'm looking for this description. There's this place where you're describing what's happening with our bone cells, and that it's like they're moving and crawling up and down the leg.
I didn't want people to be freaked out, but it is true. There's these osteoclasts that are moving like little amoebas all over your body, all over your skeleton. And it is a little creepy to think of that, but it's true. And they're slow moving, but they actually move to different places on your bone and resorb different parts of your bone. And then the osteoblasts come in and put in new bone. So that whole bone remodeling system, osteoclastic, osteoblastic activity, is so vital to keeping your bone health, your skeleton happy and healthy and strong. And that's one of the problems with the bisphosphonate medications, because they really just kill off those osteoclasts, and they don't just do that. They don't just stop the osteoclast, they stop the osteoblasts too. And so the end effect is that you don't have, that turnover, that vital turnover that makes new bone all the time. But yeah, it is a kind of nice way to think of it, but it's also a little strange.
I thought it was a great description. I thought it gave this feel for how alive our bones are as a living part of our body, of something that's continually changing, just like all the rest of us. I think we think of it as the frame, the foundation, but it's a living part that's part of everything else in our bodies.
Where most people don't. Most people think they're kind of just these, parts within us, but they're not. They're not only living, they're not only dynamic, but in my book, I think I refer to them as the center of your biological universe, of your physiological universe, because they're involved with everything in your body. So
everything that's happening, it's a beautiful thing. I am not finding, there is a lot of scientific information, but you've written it in a way that's also accessible and approachable, and the vivid descriptions that make the whole picture of what's happening in our bodies really approachable with vivid imagery. It's a beautiful book. It's just beautiful.
Very much.
So in looking at your own personal experience, and that you have gone through fractures and have experienced osteoporosis yourself, would you be willing to share how you felt when you first got your diagnosis?
Oh I was devastated. I have patients coming in every day to my office, or either come to my office or they call me up, we do teleconsults, but so many of them are crying. And I can so understand why, because I was the same way. I mean, I was really totally devastated. So I had some hip fractures, some micro fractures in my hip. I found out osteoporosis. I went to get a bone density. The technician said, "Wow, you have worse bone density than a 100-year-old woman." And it just really floored me. I mean, I was embarrassed that I was this young 45-year-old person that now was old, and so yeah, it was. I can totally understand the fear and the devastation and the questioning. The like, wait a minute, what can I do? What I can't do? Because I had no idea. I remember once I was running across. Well, my son was running across the parking lot, and there was ice on. It was in the winter, and I yelled and I said, "Hi, you don't understand. I have osteoporosis." And it's like he's going, "Well, what's osteoporosis?" But I couldn't run after him because I was so afraid of slipping and falling. So everything you do becomes a question mark. And so, yeah, it's a big deal.
It's a big deal for sure. What would you tell someone who has been diagnosed? What do you tell people? I should ask.
That we'll get things better, and it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but there's always something you can do to improve a person, whether it's, the basics as far as, getting somebody healthy overall, diet, supplements, exercise, the way they eliminate certain things maybe from their diet, and medications. There's just a whole battery of things that we can do to get somebody out of that risk for fracture. And but it takes time. This isn't an overnight thing. And I think that's I so many patients who call me and say, I've been taking your supplements and exercising, and now I'm eating 60 grams of protein for a whole month now. And it's like, well, that's great, but a month isn't going to cut it. And I know they're proud of the fact that they've done that, and they should be doing that, but they just don't understand that it took a long time to get to this situation. It takes years to get out of the situation, and I think once people understand that, then they can relax a little bit and not be so hyper on, like, can I eat that cookie? Can I do this? The little bitty things. This is about the bigger picture, and you have to have some patience. That's all. I think that's my biggest thing that I want to impress on people, that you have to do it right. You have to do the proper lab testing. You don't just guess. We do things for a reason, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yes. I think that concept of having something take a period of time, and knowing that it's moderation. It's not, oh, I can never, obviously sugar is a problem, but that to think about, oh, gee, I can't have a cookie like ever again, or I have to be completely zealous in what I'm doing at all times, that life is intended to be lived.
Yes.
And
And you have to be happy, and you have to keep going, and you can't, yes. I think the reason that attitude, that thought process gets stuck in people's brains as, oh, if I just take my calcium, my vitamin D, I'll be okay very soon, because they don't think of those bones as being dynamic. They just think of them as being these vessels that we just pour in some calcium, we fill them up, we make them hard, and everything's okay again. And that's just not the way it is. You know, there's one part in my book that is so important. There's like 2 pages, 3 pages that I talk about why you can't turn this around quickly. And yes. And one of the things is that I talk about is bone fertilizer. So when you bone is turned over every 7 to 10 years. So what you did 7 or 10 years ago to make an area of bone, when those osteoblasts made that new bone 7 years ago in a certain spot, they're also depositing certain growth factors, certain chemicals that then, when 7 years later, that same area is then being remodeled again, they're released. Those growth factors are released. Well, if they weren't put in 7 years ago, they're not going to be released now. And those are vital for stimulating osteoblastic activity. If they weren't there 7 years ago, it's not going to happen now. So that's why this is a slow process that takes time, because what we're doing now those osteoblasts will now, in an area that's being remodeled, is you're going to be able to deposit these growth factors now. So 7 years from now, things will be better, but it takes time. And that's just one of the explanations I have in the book for why this can't happen overnight. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, there's certain people in the internet that say, okay, you know, you're going to be fine in 6 months, and, you know, you're going to get great bone density, and if you just do this or that, and it's just not true, you know. And a lot of people are mistaken too when they get a bone density that says, I'm a negative 3.4, and then they get another bone density a year later that says they're negative 3.2, and then they're all happy and say, wow, see, I've gone from negative 3.4 to negative 3.2, I'm better. But that's not true, because you really have to have at least a minimum of 0.3 standard deviation difference in a bone density spine to say a statistically significant change. So if you went from negative 3.4 to negative 3.1, I'd say, yeah, in all likelihood, it's probably improved. But it really might not be. If it goes from negative 3.4 to negative 3.0 and everything looks good on those two bone densities, when I match up what's called the regions of interest, and I make sure it's the exact same machine and all that positioning, and the person went and improved 0.4, then yeah, I'll believe it. Then it looks like they did improve. But so many times a person's being told they're improved and they're not, or the reverse, that they're getting worse. You know, they go from negative 3.4 to negative 3.6, and they're all depressed because they say they're getting worse. They might not be, you know. So you got to look at these bone densities. They're complex, and you really have to know a little bit about how to read them. But I have a whole chapter in the book about that, about looking at how you can have different errors, looking to see, you know, to make sure that essentially that the doctor kind of read it pretty, you know, accurately. But so I give people hints on what to do
and what to ask their doctors about,
and what to ask the doctors about. Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about tonight was about the concept of coupling, and it seems like it fits in with what you're talking about why it takes so long to fix this. I've come to think about bone building as a bone building lifestyle, that this is something that we do, and we do it as a way of life. And again, with moderation and in all things, but that it's something that we have to continue doing. This is not a sprint, but it's the marathon.
Right. And the coupling is the answer to this. It's not dumping a bunch of calcium in a person. It is the coupling of the osteoclast with the osteoblast, having a good balance of how much bone is being resorbed by the osteoclast and how much bone is being produced by the osteoblast. That's a coupling, and that is the answer to better bone health. A lot of times, as we get older, the osteoblasts kind of lose their ability to keep up with the osteoclast, and that is a huge problem. Trying to make sure you're stimulating those osteoblasts enough to keep up with the osteoclast, and trying to calm those osteoclasts down so they don't leave the osteoblasts in the dust,
Yes. Could we take just a moment? Would you be willing to explain what coupling is for those that haven't read your book yet?
So there's 3 bone cells. The osteocytes that are kind of like they oversee everything. And they're old embedded osteoblasts. They used to be osteoblasts, but now they're embedded into the bone as osteocytes. And then there's the osteoclasts that resorb bone, the osteoblasts that build bone. So the osteocytes are embedded in the bone, and they're connected by little tunnels. And in those little tunnels are dendritic parts of themselves that send messages back and forth, and they feel the vibration or fluid vibration that's happening within those tunnels. And it's called mechanotransductions. So every time you move, every time you flex a muscle, every time you jump up and down, there's fluid waves being produced in those tunnels. And each osteocyte talks to the next osteocyte that talks to the next osteocyte and said, okay, there's a lot of activity going on here. The problem is, as we get older, those tunnels become have less ability to transmit that mechanotransduction sensory signaling. So now you might exercise, but the signal isn't as good. And when those osteocytes signal each other, then they send through other tunnels to osteoblasts to form bone. The osteoblasts then talk to the osteoclasts and say, tear down some bone. So we, the osteoblasts, can come and build the bone. So this whole coupling of these 3 cells is what it governs the whole bone remodeling. And a breakdown in any one of those areas is going to break down the whole coupling system. For example, when a person has liver disease or they have diabetes, the inside of those tunnels can become disrupted. Then that fluid shear becomes disrupted. And now we don't have that good talking back and forth between osteocytes and osteoblasts. Notice I've not said anything about calcium out there. So, that's far, far away. We don't care about the calcium right now. We're just trying to get this coupling system going. Once that's better, then the calcium can do its job. But until we get that coupling mechanism better, not much is going to happen. The problem is, as we get older, there's less and less ability to get that coupling going. And the reason why is because there's been years and years and years of deterioration of various aspects of these of the signaling mechanisms between all these cells. But that's the coupling.
Balance between all
Yes.
the different types of bone cells, and that we have to have, that the balance has to be restored before other things make a difference. That was really striking to me. I think it's a really important concept to understand. I think it goes I thought it went right in with looking at why this takes time to go ahead and.
That's the other reason why medications are often really important to do, because all during that time you're trying to change a person's body to make that whole coupling system work. Well, it takes 3, 4, 5 years to do that, to get that improved. And all during that time, if you're not taking a drug, you're still losing bone. So I often have people, I recommend to people that they use a medication short term. Then now we're stopping that bone loss. We're maybe adding some bone, and all during that time, then they are actually improving their health. And then so at the end of a couple of years, they might be able to get off the drugs, and then everything's going to be okay. They're not going to lose the bone anymore because they've changed their body enough to, now the coupling mechanism is better.
Now the coupling mechanism will work.
Right, right.
I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. I think sometimes people are, well, I know often people are really afraid of medication, and looking at that, I think the previous generation took medications. They saw all of the damage, the challenges that came with taking the medication, and they didn't necessarily see positive things happening as a result. And looking at that, there are different medications that are appropriate for different situations, and also that that medication can be used as a stopgap for a short period of time, I think is it.
Fear is founded because there is a lot of problems with the medications, but it's really connected to long-term use of the medications. Short-term use of the medications, I think they do great, most of them. But you're right, it's just a stopgap.
And working with someone who is willing to use it as a stopgap.
Yeah, that's the key, Sarah. Yeah. But the patient has to realize that they are the boss. They are going out there. They're talking to their doctor. They're talking to their dietitian. They're talking to different people. They're gathering information, but they have, they are the final say on what they want or what they want to do. And if their, doctor isn't on board with that, then they're probably not the right doctor for them. I recommend things to people, but if they don't want to do it, that's fine. I then say, okay, well, if you want to do this, maybe how about we do this or this or this? And there's always, a person has to feel comfortable with what they're doing to their body to improve themselves. And if they don't feel comfortable, then that's not the way to go,
Listening to your inner gut.
Listening to your inner gut.
There's definitely something to the wisdom of listening to your body and thinking, okay, this feels like the right path to pursue.
But those thoughts need to be based on truth and not something that is echoing in the back of their brain, this fear.
Yes.
An unfounded fear based on, for example, estrogen. I'm a huge proponent of estrogen. But remember back in 2001, the Women's Health Initiative that tested the 0.625 milligrams of estrogen and found that it increased stroke, thrombosis, cardiovascular disease. Well, if we're talking apples and apples, then yes, using estrogen at that level would be poor, not the right thing to do. But if you use bioidentical and use ultra low dose estrogen and use a patch or cream, not oral, then it's not the same as that Women's Health Initiative study was testing. So, and I think a lot of doctors still are negative on estrogen because they're still in their mind thinking back in 2001 about that health initiative study. So all I'm saying is, yeah, you got to listen to your gut, but also be true to yourself and not be fearful of things that you've heard on the internet or that you might be wrong. Investigate it. And that's why that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I referenced everything. This isn't the book is not my opinion. The book is I found, did a whole big literature search, and I came up what I think is, the truth out there. And there's a lot of things that people say, well, geez, you got to do, 100 nanograms per ml of vitamin D. Well, the research doesn't show that anymore. 10 years ago, we were thinking, there was, more and more and more vitamin D was better. But now, the research says that's not true. So, it's okay to have 40 nanograms per ml. You don't have to have 80. So all I'm saying is, don't let fear sway what you're thinking.
Yes. I think that's a really important concept, to not let fear sway what you're thinking, and to do it in a research-based way, and to evaluate what your options are, and what the benefits are, what the consequences are, and to find a nice middle ground.
Middle ground. It's okay to eat one cookie. It's not okay to eat the whole bag.
That's right. One cookie, not the whole bag. I like it.
Unless you're gluten-free, then it's only a gluten-free cookie.
That's right. Looking at all of these really interesting things, is there something that you find that's most interesting to you about our bones?
I always tell people that the number one thing to understand is that osteoclasts are a form of a white blood cell.
Yes.
Like, whoa, that, I think, to me, that's the number one thing to understand. And why is that? Because everything that ramps up a person's immune system is going to affect the osteoclasts. Because in your bones, you have mesenchymal stem cells and hematopoietic stem cells. So hematopoietic stem cells give us the osteoclasts. They also give us the immune cells. And so the immune cells talk to each other through cytokines. And those same cytokines, the osteoclasts, when they sense the cytokines that are out there in the bloodstream and stuff, they're listening. They are understanding the message, how the white blood cells talk to each other through cytokines. The osteoclasts listen. They speak the same language. And I think that's the most important thing to understand if I had to pick one single thing about osteoporosis. And so what does that tell you? It says, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to calm down my immune system. And where is 70% of your immune system? In your gut. So gut health is primo.
Gut health being really important, lowering inflammation.
Yeah, lowering inflammation. And the gut also is where you absorb nutrients so you can build your bones, but it's also where the immune system lies. And so, yeah, even if you don't know anything else about osteoporosis, just work on gut health and you'll probably help improve your bone health. That said, not all osteoporosis is caused by inflammation, or it's not primary. There's a lot of other disorders that cause bone loss. Diabetes causes decreased bone quality. Hyperparathyroidism causes decreased bone density. There's so many different disorders out there that cause bone loss. So just because a person has low bone density, that doctor that's assessing them has to rule out other things. So
I think it's really significant. You have some great diagrams talking about stem cells and the cells that they become. So I appreciated the diagrams in the book. I needed the pictures.
Well, I'm a picture person too. The way I learn things, I have a big whiteboard. It's like 4 by 6 feet. And I draw on that thing all the time. And I say, okay, how does this work? And I draw cells, and I draw cytokines, and I draw growth factors, and I draw the brain and how it releases, neurotrophic factors. And because the nerves are involved, the blood vessels are involved, the liver, the kidney, everything's involved. And so I draw little diagrams so I can see how everything connects to each other. And so the whiteboard is just crammed full of arrows and and different pictures, but it's the way I learn too. So
it's a good way to go. It makes it an experience, I would think, to draw out everything on the whiteboard too. That's a beautiful thing. So something else that I thought was, switching gears just a little bit here, something that I thought was really interesting that you talked about in your book was having patients describe how they felt when they had a compression fracture in their spine. I'm wondering if you would share how that is described. People ask me all the time, do you think I've had a compression fracture? And my answer is always, if you are concerned, go and get it checked out.
No, I think it's a great question. I love that question. And the reason why is because I've had several compression fractures, and so I've experienced it. I know exactly what it feels like, but it doesn't always feel that way. That's 50% of compression fractures are silent. People don't know. And so if you've lost height, you should probably have an X-ray. Now, why? So I'm going to go to what it feels like in a second, but why is it important to know if you've had a compression fracture? So if you're, like, say, a negative 3.0 spine, it probably, your bone, you're not really at that fracture level yet, but you might be, because bone strength is a combination of bone density and bone quality. And we have no idea when we do a bone density on somebody what their quality is, unless they do a trabecular bone score, which we can talk about later if you want. But the bone density itself is just the density, how dense that bone is. And it's only half the picture on bone strength. So there's many times a person can have a fracture and not realize it. And it's important to understand, because if they're having one fracture that they don't even know that they bent over, and it wasn't like they fell out of a tree, but they get a fracture, in all likelihood, they're going to have another fracture and another fracture and another fracture. And so they need to be on medications. It's just, there's no other way around it. You have to stop that, because there can be what's called a compression where you just have a domino effect where the compression fracture just keep going. And you gotta stop that. And that's why it's important to understand, to know if there is a fracture there. So if you have any height loss at all, over an inch and a half, then go get some pictures. When I had my fractures, and just not mine, but other patients too, that have had many patients who had compression fractures. And one of the things you almost always have, if you're sensing it, is it's like a tube or a band or a tire that's circling your torso. And that's really classic of a compression fracture. For me, I'll never forget one time, I think it was when I lifted a couch and I heard a noise. It was like the air being let out of a tire, like that. And I felt a little pain, but it wasn't like it was a big pain, but the noise, the sound was very odd. But it was and I thought that was quite interesting. Then by the next day, I had a tire around my torso, but the noise was what was fascinating to me. Part of my problem is I get fascinated by this disease, so that's why I'm so interested in it. It's terrible, and I wish I wouldn't have had to go through all those fractures, but it's also fascinating. There's many facets of it that are incredibly interesting. That's one of them. But yeah, if a person has a tire around them, they feel something going around their body, in all likelihood, that's a compression fracture.
I think that's a really insightful description, and something that is helpful for many people to be aware of. Keep on the lookout for. Oh, better get this one checked. Yes. Height and tires. Can we move into talking about bone quality and what the difference is between bone quality and bone density?
That's your segue into TBS.
Yes, exactly.
So, yes, so at bone density is just density, and then there's bone quality. And quality is lots of different things. Inside of bone is like the inside of an airplane wing. there's little bars and struts. It makes the bone light yet strong. Well, when those little bars and struts, if they become disconnected, then that's poor quality. And I don't care how much bone how much density, how much calcium you put into one end of that strut and the other end of the strut, if they're not stuck together, that density, that increase in density in these two parts won't make the bone any stronger at all. So that's one aspect of it. And then there's other parts about quality, like the crystal, how the crystal of bone is made. Larger crystals are not as strong as smaller crystals. What's in that crystal makes a difference, whether, if you use strontium or calcium, that'll make a different kind of crystal. And that crystal then acts differently. But let's go to the trabecular bone score, that's our really only way to really look at quality of bone. But people need to remember that's only one part of the quality, but it's an important piece of the quality. So some hospitals have a computer program. It's not an actual technique, but it's a computer add-on to the bone density exam that analyzes the bone density picture in a pixel array. It's called grayscale for the pixels, and to see whether those trabecular are connected or not. Then it gives you a score, and that score then can be used to say, okay, that person's trabecular are degraded, they're not degraded, they're partially degraded. And not only that, you can take that score, and then the really cool thing about it is, if you go to, we can talk about FRAX. FRAX is a way to assess fracture risk. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. But you can go online and punch in, you go to the FRAX site, and you can put different, information in there, your age, your height, everything like that. And you come up with a fracture risk. Well, now they have it so you can put your TBS score into that FRAX score. And now it improves the ability to understand what your fracture risk is your over time. A TBS, though, is only good for the spine. It's not good it doesn't analyze your hips, but at least it's one part of it. And we do get a better idea of a person's fracture risk for their spine.
And it's a remarkable thing to think about. It's just a computer add-on. So if
your hospital buys a TBS computer program tomorrow, they can go back and analyze a bone density that you had a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. They can reanalyze it and see what your TBS score was back then and what it is right now for your current bone density.
It's an incredible thing. Would you speak to the other aspects that are important for bone quality?
Well, they're harder to define because it's only in research issues. I guess the one that I would like to talk about is that of strontium, and because that's kind of on everybody's mind. And a lot of people take the strontium, and I'm not completely against it, but I'm not for it either. And the reason why is because I think what people don't realize is that all the research that was done on strontium was done on strontium renylate over in Europe and Japan, and then they got rid of strontium renylate, and so now actually it's back off label, or not off label, but in generic form, but only in Europe. But a lot of people who advocate the use of strontium now, it's being used as strontium salts, various different salts, and they take that research that was done on strontium renylate, and then they use it to say the same thing about using the strontium salts. And I'm not sure, that's valid to some extent, but I don't think it's completely valid. That's number one. Number two, and this is even more important than that, maybe I'm picking, nitpicking on that point.
The weight, the
but
weight of it.
But those two, the weight of it and how quickly it leaves the crystal, those two things are really important. So the strontium molecule is twice as heavy as that with calcium. And so because of that, it has twice the impedance of the X-rays going through a person's body when they're being analyzed in a bone density. So it makes their bones look more dense than they really are. Gives people a false sense of security. So and it works. Strontium really does work. You take strontium for a year, you're going to have better bone density. But do you have decreased fracture risk? And that's what we don't know. But even more important than that is if you stop that strontium, the bone density, you lose bone density fairly rapidly because you're losing those strontium molecules. You have to really take the strontium all the time to keep that strontium in the bone. If you stop it though, and you start losing that density, there could be a increased fracture risk that's beyond what we're thinking of as increased fracture risk from just that density being lost. So it could be a more risk for fracture than if you stayed on it, just because you lose it quickly. And that's what I'm fearful
of. What about the additional with strontium, because it is heavier, does that then also create more brittleness, or is that?
There's been several studies on that. I think the bottom line is it's probably okay. I've read several accounts on that, and I think that I think they don't really know, but I think that the strength is probably about the same. It's just that when you lose it, then that's when we get the question on, is that crystal now worse off? And I think it probably is.
Okay. I think that's a really interesting thing. And I think I know in our Facebook group that there's ongoing discussion about strontium. I really appreciate you speaking to it. It's insightful. Looking at this, we have a few questions that people asked ahead of time. And then I'd also like to let people know that if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the Facebook group, and we'll see if we can get to them. I have a few that I would like to that have come in. So someone is asking about phosphorus and colas, and I'll just read the question. So if phosphorus, such as in colas, is bad for your bones, why do so many supplements include phosphorus?
Well, because your bones, there's a lot of phosphorus in bones. So you need phosphorus. It's just that phosphorus is pretty ubiquitous in all the foods we eat. So people aren't usually, deficient in phosphorus. So you don't have to supplement with this phosphorus. And some, especially the microcrystalline hydroxyapatite supplements, all have phosphorus in it, and that's okay. But you don't necessarily need to take extra phosphorus. So, and the cola drinks, you shouldn't drink them because they are acidic and lots of sugar. And I mean, even if they're, I guess, a diet cola, they're still acidic. So, yeah, stay away from them.
For sure. For sure. And then there's another nutritional question that says that's asking about the pairing if D3 and K2 should be taken together, and then also asking
if what in K2?
Vitamin D3 and K2, should they be taken together, and then the pairing of calcium and magnesium together, a yay or a nay?
Well, I get those questions every single day, and I'm a kind of busy guy, and I don't have time to and also I'm not organized enough to be able to do that. So I think probably, yeah, calcium, magnesium probably compete a little bit with each other. D and K, they're both fat soluble, so they probably compete a little bit, and vitamin A, but I think, I don't know if anybody knows the percentage of what it decreases the absorption. So I say to people, just take them, and you're going to be taking hopefully maybe a little bit more than maybe you need, but you're going to hedge your bets. And if you want to be really specific, I guess, yeah, take them separately. But a lot of people don't have that. And remember, this is a long-term battle. And I just think that we need to move on and live our lives and be happy and have other things that we want to do in our lives, and not be so regimented that we take our calcium at 8, take our magnesium at 9, take our K and D. If that's how we're going to live our life, and that might be, people might choose to do that, which is fine. But I don't have that time for myself, and I think most of my patients don't want to do that. So I want them to be happy, and I want them to go out and go to the gym and enjoy themselves and go for walks and come back and eat and take their supplements and then be happy and do something else. So I don't advocate separating all that stuff.
That's a beautiful thing. I was just sort of say amen to that. It can take over your whole life in such a hurry.
I don't want people to become more anxious than they already are on this. So
yes. There's another one. So this is coming in right now during our discussion. What is the cutoff age for estrogen? Someone was told that they were too old.
Super question, and I am not the person to answer that. I'm changing my mind a little bit on that. And I think that probably everybody, if you're 30 years past your menopause, you're 80 or 90, then maybe not. But I think even if you're 15 years past menopause and you're doing an ultra low dose bioidentical transdermal, let's try it. I used to be, more strict and say, well, anything past 7 years past menopause is probably not a good way to do it. But I think I'm changing my mind on that. I think it does, because it helps so many other things. Now, if you have really low bone density and you think that you're going to fix it with estrogen, you're not, because the estrogen might improve a little bit, but it's really there to stop the loss. It's not approved as an osteoporosis medication. It's a support. And that's what people don't realize. They think, well, estrogen is natural, so I'll go ahead with that, but I won't do one of these other drugs. But the other drugs will actually be much more beneficial. You just do them short term, but then you can do the estrogen, ultra low dose, long term. And then I also recommend people, if they do an estrogen and progesterone, that they get tested, starting two months after they start, to make sure they're not taking too much. So using one dose, looking at, and to see if they're 20, 30 picograms per ml. But if it shoots up to 60, well, then I think that's too much. That's not necessary. We're not trying to build your bones with the estrogen. We're trying to slow down the loss, maybe give it a little bit of improvement, improve other organs in your body, improve your whole body system with the estrogen. But if there's a major loss, you probably need to do an anabolic drug like Forteo, Tymlos, or Evenity.
That's so interesting to contemplate. Thank you. Okay, looking at other questions. Does taking collagen help? Marine collagen versus beef collagen, is one more beneficial? That may be a deep in the weeds nutrition question.
I think it's a great question. And I don't know the answer to that. I think collagen is incredibly important to do. I tell every single one of my patients that to take collagen. I think it's great for two reasons. Number one, it provides amino acids, but it also provides polypeptide chains that directly stimulate those osteoblasts. And that's, as we talked about 25 minutes ago, we need to get that coupling going. And oftentimes the osteoclasts are higher level and the osteoblasts are lower level activity. So we want to do everything we can, exercise, collagen, protein. Those are the things that really stimulate those osteoblasts. So yeah, collagen is really important for that. The thing that I don't know is, is it better to do, fish or beef or chicken? I do not know that. I sell a product that's beef because I think the research behind it looks good. That's what I promote. But chicken and fish might be just as good. I just don't know the answer to that. I mean, somebody else might, and I don't. So
I think that's a beautiful answer. I appreciate it very much. Oh, here's I think a good question. So should we take vitamin D if our levels are normal?
No. If you have between 40 and 60 nanograms per ml, and you know that, I don't know where this person lives, but make sure they test it in March, because that's the lowest point. And it should be in March, probably 40, and 35 is the lowest, but probably 40 is better. Because then in the summertime, they're going to get more sun, and then it should shoot up to 55 or 60. It changes throughout the year. But yeah, if you don't need it, if you're out in the sun and going to get it, then you don't need to take it. That's why everybody needs to check labs. And people are always asking me, Dr. McCormick, how much vitamin D should I take? And I say, I don't know, let's test what your level is, and then we'll figure it out. And it's a lot of trial and error. Some people need 1,000, some people need none, some people need 4,000, so everybody's different.
I love that. Checking by test to really know.
Very testy oriented. So I like to get tests, and that's the only way we know for what's going on, number one, and then number two, if we're improving that person. I don't want to wait for 2 years for a bone density. I want to get lab tests now, and then every 4 or 5 months repeat those lab tests. If there's something wrong with the lab, then we're going to repeat it 4 or 5 months and see if what we're doing is helping.
My next question you just answered, and that was, how often should the testing be done? And 4 to 5
depends on the lab, but like for the estrogen, you're going to know, if you start estrogen, you're going to know in 2 months, what the level is. But if you're checking a bone resorption marker, like acetylpeptide for bone resorption activity, it's going to take 5 months for that to change, probably.
It's really significant. Okay. If my blood tests come back that my calcium is in the normal range, should I still take a calcium supplement?
Yes, because that really has not that much to do with your blood calcium level. What the blood calcium level is a reflection of is, if it's really low, yeah, that probably means you're not absorbing calcium, or you're not getting enough in your diet. If it's really low, so 8.7, 8.8, something like that. What it's really looking for, though, is your parathyroid. So are your parathyroid glands in your neck, are they overactive or underactive, or they're normal? So just because you have a perfect 9.5 serum calcium doesn't mean by any stretch of imagination that you have enough calcium. What are the parathyroids doing? They're assessing how much calcium is in the blood, and if it gets low, they pump out parathormone, which breaks down your bones, that releases calcium to bring that blood calcium to normal. All that. So a normal blood calcium only means that, yeah, your parathyroid glands are working. Has nothing to do with how much calcium you're taking in, really.
That's really insightful. Okay, here's another one. If we do a drug short term, I've been told that once you start an osteo drug, Forteo, Tymlos, Evenity, or Reclast, you need to stay on something for the rest of your life after you're done with those, because you lose what you gained.
Absolutely wrong. No, you do not. So if we have time, I can go through all 4 of those drugs I think you just mentioned.
Okay.
So Prolia is not an anabolic, really. It's an anti-resorptive. And yes, you have to, when people are always told, Once you start Prolia, you have to stay on it forever, and that's not true. But you do have to get off of it properly. And you have to go from Prolia to reclass. You can't go from Prolia to Fosamax or Actonel. You have to do reclass. And I take a whole, that's a very complex question, but I run through the whole system of how it's done, the transition in the book. So that people can read those couple pages in the book. But it's a little complex, but it's vital for it to work properly. But yes, if you just stop Prolia and didn't follow it up with reclass, there's a huge percentage of time that person will lose all that bone density and then some, in what's called a rebound effect. Forteo and Tymlos, they're the parathyroid analogs, so the daily injections, you do it for 18 months to 2 years. Those have to be, so because they ramp up not only osteoblastic activity, but osteoclastic activity also, a person does need to then calm down those osteoclasts once they stop the Forteo or Tymlos. And you have to calm down those osteoclasts with a poison. That's the bisphosphonates. I mean, you can calm them down with the Prolia, but then after the Prolia, then you have to do a bisphosphonate. The end is always going to be a bisphosphonate to stop that osteoclastic activity. And then Evenity is the same thing. You'd have to do an anti-resorptive of some kind afterwards to prevent any rebound from that. The interesting thing about Evenity, it's a little different than all these other drugs, and that's a biphasic drug. So the first 8 months or so, it's anabolic. The second half of the last 4 months or so, it's more of an anti-resorptive. But still, when you stop it, you have to go through at least 1 year of another anti-resorptive drug.
That was really well said. The next, I think we are running on time. The next thing that I would really like to talk about is where can people buy your book? Where can they find this beautiful book? How can they get in touch with you? And what are ways that you work with clients and help people?
You can get my book through my office, 413-253-9777, and we can send you a book. You can also get it at Amazon. And so you just go to Amazon and type in Great Bones Keith McCormick or Great Bones Taking Control of Your Osteoporosis. If you just type in Great Bones, it doesn't come up. So type in, you have to do Great Bones Keith McCormick or something like that. But yeah, those are the two ways you can get it at my office or my website too. Yeah, you can go to my website. So keithmccormickdc.com or something like that. I always forget what my website is, but people can figure that out. There is another Keith McCormick out there, and he is I think he's an antique car salesperson. So that's not me. But otherwise, put R Keith McCormick and you'll come up with me. The way I work with people is I have people send me all their labs, all their bone densities from the last 2 or 3 years for the labs and all their bone densities that they have. And then they come to my office or we talk on the phone, and I go over what I think is either, what is causing their loss, their risk, what kind of fracture risk I think they're at. And we talk about nutrition, exercise, diet, and if they need medications at all. So, and then I recommend that. And then I'm a chiropractic physician, so I can't prescribe medications, but I explain to people what I think would be my first choice on medication, and then they can. And I'm trying to educate people so they can have a really good conversation with their MD if that's, what needs to happen as far as medications. And then they can sit down with him or her, and say, okay, this seems to be what would work better with me. And their MD might have, or DO might have a different opinion, but at least now they can have a better conversation.
Yes. The empowered discussion.
Yes.
Having an empowered discussion is really important, and to be able to have the education so that you can then speak and ask important questions and to be able to advocate for yourself and to really get the help that you need.
And if you don't and have a good background in that coupling mechanism and how these drugs work, which the book talks about that exact thing in chapter 14, I go through all those medications and how they work and how they don't work and what their pros are and what their cons are. And, you know, I tell people if they need a medication, read that chapter 3 times, because when they go to their MD or the DO or whoever's going to prescribe them something, then they can have a really good conversation of which way to go. So often I have patients that they're negative 4.2 and their doctor wants to put them on a bisphosphonate. And that's not good enough. That's just not good enough. Or they would say, well, let's try a bisphosphonate first. And if it doesn't work, then we'll do an antibiotic. That's not the way to go either. But people will understand why that isn't a good way to go if they read that chapter.
So lots of incredible, valuable information in this wonderful book. Dr. McCormick, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time tonight to come and speak to our group, to share your valuable insights.
You're very welcome.
Questions.
It's nice to have a conversation with you, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to end our Facebook Live.
And thanks for all those who joined tonight. Thank you.
Yes.